Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Jack Threlfall Show. In this video, I'm going to be talking about everything happening in the International Motorsport calendar this January and all the facts, stats, and numbers you need to know for a first time fan to get into some new high quality racing drama. I'll let the intro music play. Let's get started. Okay, so there are three events that I want to talk about today that really stand out for me this January. And the first of those is the Daytona 24 hour. The second is the WRC Monte Carlo rally. And the third is Formula E Mexico. So we're going to talk through all of those today. And we're going to start with Daytona. Now, particularly nerdy fans will remember the Daytona 24 hour from last year, where we were treated at the end of the race to a truly titanic battle between Matteo Jaminet and his rival Vanthoor in two GT Porsches in that last kind of 30 minutes of the race. Really, they had this incredible really showcase of just how awesome multi-class racing can be when they're these two truly identical cars both battling for position, battling for the win. While you're watching them battle, you're seeing this flow of DPI at the time, now LMPH cars and LMP2 cars as well. It's really going to be a bit of an acronym game today as we talk through all the different classes, but I'll try my best to be as concise and accurate as possible. We'll see in the comments how that turns out. But the Jaminet Vanthoor battle from last year was a really incredible showcase of two drivers pushing just over that limit of hard and fair racing, but giving it to each other in the exact same dosage and really fighting it out to the end. It was really incredible. So I'd recommend that if you're looking to understand just what an awesome event the Daytona 24 hour is. It's really a showcase of international motorsport brands. It's kind of akin to Le Mans, really. And also, we have that 24 hours of Spa. But in terms of car classes, it's really only rivaled by Le Mans in its scale. And of course, taking place at the infield Daytona circuit using part of that NASCAR oval, which will be, their season opener too, in the Cup Series. It's really a huge event as we start the year of motorsport, as we kind of rev up our engine, so to speak, for 2023. There's going to be so many eyes on the Daytona 24 hour. It's also a showcase of junior talent. Part of the advantage of multi-class grids is just the number of cars you can get on a racetrack, and it's also those cars that are going to be being shared between drivers throughout that 24-hour window. So the amount of drivers that are able to get in that kind of exhibition and show their talent, a lot of them young drivers who are going to be kind of looking to showcase their talent for a factory owner, for a factory seat, in a motorsport world dominated by kind of self-sponsorship and individual sponsors, that kind of thing. If you can really showcase your talent at an event like this, it's almost like a Formula 2 Monaco or a Formula 3 Macau Grand Prix. It's used in driver development by a lot of these academies, by a lot of even the Formula 1 academies, to bring young drivers forward and give them a real test. It's such a sensory overload, that level of multi-class racing, of finding a gap, of always being overtaken and always overtaking through the night, a test of the senses, a test of the mind. 24-hour race is arguably the biggest test of that psychological factor of any motorsport event, and that's exactly what we're going to get with the Daytona 24 hour. It's also particularly poignant because of the Cadillac Andretti Formula One connection that's dominated headlines at the moment, where you've kind of got this really interesting thing playing out. Andretti have been trying to join F1 for a long time, and joining up with Cadillac, you would think, can only strengthen their bid almost. And we know there's this kind of entry fee. All the teams are saying, all the current Formula One teams saying, we want proof that this new team isn't going to be like 10th or 11th in the constructor standings in its first year. They want evidence that a team is going to come in and be competitive. At least that's what they say. Then you see a bid like the Cadillac Andretti bid, a team that is kind of perfect evidence. We're going to see factory Cadillacs, if you will, run at this Daytona 24-hour race. They're not going to look anything like a Cadillac you would see on the road, but they'll have Cadillac badges on them. There are these incredible LMP2 and DPI or LMP8 chassis. Again, we're back to the acronym game with the class names. But Cadillac have been competing in IMSA right at the front for a long time in events like Sebring, events like this Daytona 24 hour. And with the conversations happening at the moment, getting that Cadillac badge at the front of a motorsport broadcast, one that's going to be watched around the world, you would think that their performance there might, if they do really well, aid some of the press getting on their side. But I mentioned that kind of competitive element that the teams, the current Formula One teams, have brought up. Then you can see them being a little bit hypocritical because they're talking about how adding this 11th team is then a dilution of the individual kind of bargaining power of the current teams. But actually, overall, the bargaining power that you would have a smaller fraction of is increased as a whole by adding a team to that market. So I do think it's a bit of a paper thin argument, but I suppose what you can empathise with the current Formula One teams not wanting to change anything because the formula that they've stuck with, should we say, for the last 4 or 5 years, has only grown the sport to bigger heights than ever. So I suppose that they don't want to fix a good thing, right? In a way. So you can understand a little bit of that apprehension, but I do think an event like the Daytona 24 Hour, which I should probably get around to talking about, is going to be a chance for Cadillac to kind of steal some headlines again and to strengthen their bid and to strengthen the pressure on the FIA to kind of ignore this politicizing from the teams. So we talked about how it's one of the first big races of the year and also how multi-class racing has its incredible strengths. Part of the amazing strength of this year's driver lineup includes Elio Castroneves, the winner from last year, and also the 4-time Indy 500 winner. Things like the Daytona 24 Hour, what they're perfect for are bringing together drivers who are talented in multi-class racing, and also multi-class in the sense that, completely different series, as well as multi-class in the individual Daytona sense, right? So Castroneves has competed all across categories, a bit like a Juan Pablo Montoya or a Michael Andretti or a Tony Stewart as well, a fantastic example of a driver who's won on this very Daytona oval track in the Cup Series, but also has competed. I think Tony Stewart stands out in my memory because he's one of few people who have completed this what they call double duty, where you do the Indy 500 and the Charlotte Coca-Cola 600 in the same day. That's a proper multi-class race if you consider that, which is one of the most ridiculous things. Because if you think about it, that's like an 8-hour stint, whereas we're seeing maximum, I think 3-4 hour stints at Daytona. So I spoke about how it brings together so many legends and racers looking to seize kind of one of racing's greatest crowns. It's a career achievement to win the Daytona 24 Hour. It's like winning Monaco. It's like winning Le Mans. It's like winning the Daytona 500 or the Indy 500 as well. It kind of is really on that level. And IMSA and the World Endurance Championship are sort of in competition, but there's so much back and forth. They are kind of very similar series, but for IMSA, which is like an American-only version of the World Endurance Championship, where you get to see that multi-class racings play out, so it's going to be the 61st running of the race. Fans of motorsport can look all the way back to 1966, where we saw Ken Miles and the Ford GT40 win this race. Back in those days, pretty incredible for him, I'm sure, to take the crown then and then go on to compete at Le Mans. As I mentioned, even back in those days, it was treated as kind of this warm-up race, not only for the drivers, but also for the cars. If you've got a new prototype car that you want to take to Le Mans, the biggest endurance show on earth, Daytona's the perfect place to run down the car and also run down the team, right? Motorsport is so much bigger than just cars and drivers because you have this extra third element of the team, not only the team that have designed the car, but the team who have to work on the pit stops, work on the strategy, and take on that mental load of a 24-hour race while the driver may have time out the car. The teams, the people who are kind of working on setup, tyre strategy, tyre pressure, like all those tiny little moments, so many pit stops, so many changes, so much to be lost and gained in safety cars through these endurance events. It's really, really hard to get stuff wrong, or it's really easy to get stuff wrong, should we say. And they're very hard lessons to learn when the stakes are so high, when you can imagine, finishing in the 23rd hour, suddenly you've got a technical problem and you retire in the 23rd hour of the race from the lead, or moments like that. The psychological toll of that is absolutely incredible. But yes, 61st running of the race. It's a 3.56 mile road course using part of that banking, but weaving through the inside. I'll put up a picture of the layout. It's kind of mostly medium speed corners, a few slow speed overtaking zones, and also that back straight is a great opportunity for slipstreaming. One of the amazing drivers who's won this race before and will be cemented in motorsport history is Dan Gurney. He's a real legend of motorsport. Of course, the Gurney flap, again, something I can show a picture of, but it's basically like a little sticky uppy bit on the end of a spoiler is something he invented. But Gurney, as a racing driver, won the first championship round of this race in 1962. And at that time, it was a 3-hour endurance race. And it was even considered in those days a massive, massive challenge, particularly because of that effect of the banked corner, the bravery it takes to get right up close to the wall in that banked corner, because you're hitting the top speed of these kind of prototype cars in those days. It evolved then from the first running in 62 to 1964, where it became a 2,000 kilometer high speed challenge, effectively doubling the 1,000 kilometer races that we saw in Spa and the Nordschleife. And as I mentioned, Ken Miles went on to take the crown in 66 in the run up to the 66 Le Mans battle in the Ford versus Ferrari movie, as many will remember. That cemented it in film. And actually, I would argue it's one of the better racing movies. An incredible performance there by Christian Bale playing Ken Miles. Again, an opportunity for me to test my editing skills and get a picture up on screen there. Also, one quick thing that I did want to point out, not only is it called the Daytona 24-hour, but as with basically every famous motorsport event at the moment, it's got a title sponsor. And for the Daytona 24-hour, that title sponsor is Rolex. The Rolex Daytona 24-hour, it's been called that since 1992. And part of the romance of that is that each winner of the classes gets a Rolex Daytona. Again, picture on screen for that. The Rolex Daytonas, just a little bit of kind of watch nerd history for anyone, were popularized by Paul Newman, a famous Hollywood actor turned racing driver, kind of one of the first legendary gentleman drivers, which is something that has been cemented into the history of Le Mans and sports car racing, these kind of privateers doing it not, well, of course, partially for the thrill of winning, but just the passion of racing, people that have come from all different worlds of businesses, a lot of rich guys looking to kind of burn their money up. And a lot of people say the best way to make a small fortune in racing is to start out with a big one. And these gentleman drivers are the ones that kind of bring those big fortunes in, and they don't care about where the money goes. They're in there for the thrill. Paul Newman is a super classic example of that. Apologies if you can hear the helicopter going overhead there. I'm sure Paul Newman maybe could be flying that, but he actually had a little kind of final note on the Paul Newman thing and the Rolex Daytonas. The most expensive watch ever sold at the time in 2017 was one of Paul Newman's very own Rolex Daytonas. And I'll put on screen the final sale price, $17.8 million. It's pretty absurd. And you can understand how it was pretty hard to beat that in the record books for most expensive piece of jewelry ever. But that watch was worn by Newman during the races. It was engraved on the back with a special message. And there was also, if anyone at home has this, there's a Paul Newman kind of edition on the Rolexes where inside the dial it's like a sort of special different color. They call it an exotic dial. Again, picture on screen to show the difference there. But watches just with this little bit of extra color, Rolex Daytona special kind of editions sell for hundreds of thousands if you can find one. And of course, this one that was actually owned by Newman went on to again, sell for that pretty absurd price. By modern standards, it's a pretty simple, tasteful silver watch with some color on the dial. But the kind of specific design point of the Daytona is this little extra thing that it has on the bezel, which is designed actually for racing drivers to read while they're racing, to basically help you count out like lap times, count out how fast you're going in a 60-second window. It's kind of got all these extra little bits on the side, and if then you can use those to kind of do some maths in your head. Hopefully the watch segment isn't too boring, but I think it's just a little bit something different, a little bit of extra knowledge, understanding the connection between Rolex, the connection between Daytona. It's all money with this kind of top level motorsport. And hey, gentlemen drivers love a big shiny watch. So we'll go down to this year, step away from the 60s for a second and catch right back up to the 2023 Daytona 24-hour. Okay, moving on from the brilliant watch segment there that I definitely had to put in the video. For the 2023 Daytona 24-hour, we're going to have 60 cars on track, 9 in the top class. That top class is going to be called LMDH, which is going to be similar to the LMPH that we're seeing in the World Endurance Championship. But for the IMSA Championship, LMDH replaces DPI with a kind of a chassis design and a rule set that's basically designed to be more attractive to manufacturers. And we're seeing that with the increased manufacturer representation. So one of the pinnacles, one of the kind of biggest signs of the success of this new rule change for the top class at the Daytona 24 hour is the entrance of a brand like BMW. There was a big press announcement, a little bit like the Ferrari hypercar that we're seeing enter Le Mans in 2024. Both Le Mans and IMSA have this goal of bringing manufacturers to the categories, trying to get more representation of the diversity of brands in world motorsport, and basically just more cars on track, more money on track, more sponsors on track, more viewers, and the end goal being more racing, right? That's kind of the principle, and hopefully we'll get to see that kind of ethics, that rule change tested. So we've got the LMP-H cars, which are going to be the Porsches, the Acuras, the Cadillacs, and the BMWs. Then you've got LMP2 class, which is going to be where you're going to see a lot of those development drivers, a lot of those drivers who are looking to make a name for themselves in a driver academy, right? You can imagine for a young aspiring driver, maybe someone in Indy Light, someone in Formula 3, someone who's won something like a German Formula 4, looking to work their way up the motorsport calendar by winning in a class like this or just gaining experience in a class like LMP2 or LMP3, which then stands for Le Mans Prototype, right? The LMP. Um, those drivers are going to really be treating this race as super important for their careers, and winning it, or podiuming, making some kind of attractive move to stick in the memory of these important, powerful figures in motorsport could be a huge moment for these drivers. So we'll absolutely be seeing how they go. In the GT classes, again, those are kind of a GT3 type spec car. We're going to be seeing a huge range of manufacturers. So all the way from BMW, Lexus, Porsche, Lamborghini, Aston Martin, Ferrari, Acura, Corvette, all these different chassis bodies. Hopefully we're going to see a kind of parity in the rule set where we don't see a bias towards one car. Normally that shakes out throughout the year where, privateer teams will decide whose car they want to buy based on who has the best, but it's the role of the rule set to try and make them as equal as possible and leave the battles to be had on track more than in the technical design room. The biggest part of the 24 hour for me that I really love is just the psychological strain of it, because you see, what I loved watching Le Mans last year was just the toll that 23 and a half hours of racing takes on takes on the body and takes on the mind of all these people in the teams. Because even the leaders, they get so superstitious about, don't celebrate too early, don't do anything, like just the amount that your brain goes through in that time. You're seeing engineers, you're seeing people that have devoted their lives to getting to the highest level of motorsport completely lose it for that kind of last hour. And there's just something so brilliant about that passion. No one's doing this just for their own, for their own ego or anything like that. It's such an enormous sacrifice, and such an enormous toll to take to compete in a 24-hour race and to compete at the front, right? Obviously, I suppose you could argue it's probably not that hard to come last, but to put in a competitive performance at one of these races is so difficult and such a huge challenge that by the end of it, you're seeing all these superstitious team members, like everyone's crossing their fingers. You don't want to celebrate too early. Anything could happen, even down to the last lap, down to the last minute. We saw, 2021 Formula One, just how things can change in that late window. Imagine if that had happened 23 hours into the race, not just an hour and a quarter, right? It is such a huge challenge for these drivers. And as I mentioned earlier, the Cadillac entry was going to have a lot of eyes on it. So I want to call this segment like a sort of names to watch, right? Because it can be quite intimidating with 60 drivers on the grid to know who you're going to be looking out for, who's going to be who's going to be the ones to watch, basically. And what I focused on here are drivers that you may recognize from other categories. And I think it's a great kind of sign of the evidence of just how awesome the Daytona 24 hour is, that we're seeing all these champions of other categories brought together, right? So we're starting with the Cadillac factory team. They've got two super strong entries in the top class. Among their drivers are Sebastian Bourdais, the four-time champion from the Champ Car series, which was the whole bag of worms if you don't understand what Champ Car is. But it's basically this kind of, there was a big split off between the official IndyCar and a sort of breakaway IndyCar series in the kind of late 2000s. And Sebastian Bourdais, before he joined Formula One with Toro Rosso, had a huge amount of success in those categories and was a really dominant champion there. And it was undeniable in his success. The story behind why that championship is what it was, I suppose, is a bit weird. But his success in that was pretty undeniable. You've also got Scott Dixon, 6-time, I believe, IndyCar series winner, a huge talent, and someone that was pushing every single year in the IndyCar Championship. We saw, thanks to, of course, friend of the show, Tom Gaymore, bring us a huge amount of Scott Dixon's incredible driving throughout last year's IndyCar season, always managing to find a way to get a car in the top 10 and always managing to find a way to get a car into a championship fight. You also have Formula E driver Alex Lynn. He's won the British Formula E round before. He's a real talent. He's done a lot of Le Mans before and a lot of endurance racing experience. Then we move on to the Porsche Penske team, who are featuring Matteo Jaminet, who we spoke about earlier in that GT battle. And they're also featuring Felipe Nasser in their driver lineup, who, unfortunately for him, stands out in my memory as the victim of one of Max's finest overtakes, the young Max Verstappen, 2015 in that Toro Rosso. He puts this incredible move, his first, of course, Grand Prix at Spa-Francorchamps. He puts this move on Nasser, who was in the Sauber at the time, around the outside of Blanchimont. He puts this incredible, just keeps his foot in, sweeping into that final chicane at Spa, gets over to the inside line through sheer bravery and balls. And it was a sign of what was to come, I think, for Max there. Andretti Acura, also partnering up with the Wayne Taylor Racing private team, are running Louis Delatraz and Brendan Hartley. Brendan Hartley is, of course, ex-Formula One driver, teammate of Pierre Gasly. Also, I believe 2016 World Endurance Champion, something like that. But of course, he's competed at the highest level of endurance racing before, so hopefully some strong runnings for them. The BMW team, we mentioned they're entering the top class for the first time. They're running the IndyCar star Colton Herta, who was a target for AlphaTauri, basically. He was a first pick if he could get the super license rules bended for him to get into Formula One, right? Like, we could have seen Colton Herta in Formula One this year if the rules were different and if the rules kind of gave fair equity to the IndyCar Championship, which they don't, likely because it's not an FIA championship and they kind of don't want to assign too much power to American championships like IndyCar at risk of people avoiding European expensive junior formulas for that. But again, that's a whole separate conversation. We are seeing Herta hopefully running well with the BMW team. Last year's winners, Maya Shank Racing, they took the top class crown last year, looking to defend it with Tom Blomqvist and Elio Castroneves. They took on the big factory teams last year, took the victory home in the top class, and another win for them to go back to back would be absolutely huge for all their sponsors and would put Castroneves really in that conversation of greatest multi-class drivers of all time. Actually, speaking of kind of greatest drivers, this idea of who's the best when you add everything together. Another friend of the show, Jamey Price, had a bit of a viral tweet a couple of weeks ago saying it's very unlikely, or it's, you can be certain that actually a Formula One grid of 20 drivers does not feature the 20 best drivers in the world. And I think he's absolutely right. It might feature the 4 best, or it might feature, the best Formula One drivers would probably beat anyone else in the same category. But I think once you get past, basically the champions, and like Charles and Lando, that you really start to run out of talent that would be picked over other drivers like Castroneves, like these kind of endurance champions who at the top classes are competing in arguably more mentally tasking, more physically tasking races than Formula One Grand Prix. But we'll see how they turn out, right? It's the great thing about Daytona is this kind of merging of all the categories. That's basically the end of my notes. I hope that was all right. I'll try and edit it down to as little as possible and get you all the information you need.